So the Knights Templar were put out of business, and it was done almost overnight. Their leaders were killed, and the rest of them went into hiding, ran away. Now, one of the few countries in Europe which did not actively persecute the Knights Templar was Scotland. And so the theory is that a lot of the Knights Templars went to Scotland where they were safe, and they settled down there, and they continued to practice their Knight Templarism, which was a kind of ritual, and that became modern Freemasonry. That's a very popular theory now. I won't express any views on its reality. However, one thing it touches upon that I think is real was a very interesting book published just a couple of years ago, which argued that modern Freemasonry started in Scotland. And I think there's pretty strong evidence for that. That what happened was that there were our good old stonemason friends who were building churches, cathedrals, castles for the nobility and the upper classes. They were a very proud sort, because in fact a stonemason is an extraordinary craftsman and has to know a lot more than, say, a carpenter does. Why? Well, look at those cathedrals they built. Have some of you been to some of the great cathedrals in Europe, in England, even some in America? Those cathedrals are marvels. How does the roof stay up there? How does the weight of the roof, how is it supported? There's nothing under it, right? So it has to be supported somehow. How did they do that? They figured out some very, very clever ways of buttressing the walls so they could have a roof very high up, spanning a vast space without collapsing. The stonemasons were engineers. And like any engineer, they had to know a lot of mathematics in order to put those buildings up and not have them collapse. So they were highly skilled, not only as craftsmen, as workers, but as engineers and as mathematicians. And quite beyond that, if you go into one of the old cathedrals, what do you see inside the cathedrals? Is it just plain stone blocks all around? A lot of carving, isn't there? And the carving shows all sorts of things, so that the stonemasons had also to be very knowledgeable about the legends, scripture behind the religion. And not just behind the religion, Christianity as we know it, but lots of other things. There is in one of the great cathedrals in France a wonderful labyrinth in the floor. Are you familiar with the labyrinths? You may know this French labyrinth has become very, very popular. It's done in a lot of churches in America. Now, we've got one downtown in Wheaton, right? Okay, very, very popular. Do you know what was in the center of that labyrinth in the French cathedral originally? It's not there any longer because it was cast in metal. And during one of the French wars, they took up the metal and melted it down and made cannonballs out of it. But there was a huge medallion in the center of that labyrinth originally. And you know what the labyrinth, what the medallion showed? Those are good guesses, but no. No, that's a good guess too, but no. It showed a Greek hero by the name of Theseus, who was slaying a monster named the Minotaur. And that's where the labyrinth comes from, out of a Greek legend involving Theseus and the Minotaur. Now, the people who built that cathedral knew all about that legend, right? because in the center of the labyrinth they put that medallion. You've got eyes and you've got roses in lots of stained glass windows in the cathedrals. Okay, so the people who built the cathedrals were good craftsmen, they were engineers, they were mathematicians, they were well informed, they were educated, well informed people, right? So they were a class apart from the usual workmen. And that meant they had good relationships with their patrons, the upper classes for whom they were building these castles and cathedrals and other buildings. And so they got together and they began to initiate into their trade unions, guilds, some of the upper class Scotsmen, because they were buddies, they were brothers. And out of that seems to have arisen Freemasonry as we know it, which then spread southward into England. Incidentally, I might add that the Grand Lodge of England doesn't like this explanation at all. Because the real historical records of Freemasonry begin in the year 1717, when four Masonic lodges in London got together and formed a Grand Lodge. And after that, we have some pretty fair records from then on. Before then, almost nothing, only scattered references in the records of Masonry. All right, now, how many women stonemasons were there? None but all that I know of. Why not? Well, it's highly skilled work, but it is also, it requires it's muscular work, isn't it? Now, women are strong, but their strength is one of endurance. Women live longer than men. They can endure things longer and better than men can. Women have greater endurance than men do. But men can run faster. In the short haul, a man beats a woman every time. In the long haul, a woman beats a man every time. All right? That's just the fact of life. I don't think it's fair, but it's a fact of life. So for activities that require lifting, right? Heavy muscular activity, those are male activities. So the first Freemasons were exclusively men. Why? Well, because stonemasons were exclusively men. Now, there are a number of legends about women who were initiated into Freemasonry. There's only one case that has anything like substantial evidence for it, and even it is not by any means conclusive. Freemasonry was a male domain until the 1890s. In 1882, actually, a French lodge of Freemasons did a very naughty thing. This French lodge of Freemasons, which was called, if I translate the French name into English, the Lodge of Freethinkers, consisted of a lot of men who were in favor of women's rights. They were feminists, and they were working for votes for women and equal rights for women. So they decided that they would initiate a woman. And they took a very active woman, active in feminist work in France. Her name was Marie de Rem, and they initiated her. And they informed the Grand Orient, which was the head body of their Freemasons in France, what they'd done. And the Grand Orient said, you can't do that. It's not permitted. It is not part of Freemasonry that women should be admitted. And they said, we've done it. And the Grand Lodge said, well, then you aren't Freemasons anymore. So they got, in effect, excommunicated, and that lodge dried up and disappeared. But the members in it did not. they got together